are these people? Who are these people?
Well, hi, everybody. What's going on? This is Indy. It's INN One-on-One, your favorite interview show where I talk to some of the best independent personalities that you don't necessarily see. You definitely won't see them on corporate media. So I wanted to introduce today's guest, Seven C's. He's been all over the place, really, for the last few months. I've been so impressed with some of the work that he's done. So nice to meet you, man. Not in person. I think we were on one stream together on AM Wake Up a couple of months ago. Mm-hmm. That was great, yeah. Man. With Ryan, that was a powerhouse of a stream. So I wanted to have you on for a one-on-one so that I could learn a little bit about your background and a little bit about like what you've been researching, what motivates you, drives you, the angles that you kind of look towards when you do that. And what you've already started to uncover, discover, and where you think it goes, and what do we do about it? So yeah. I think that's a good place to kind of start. I also know that you went to Third Eye Carnival this weekend, so I also definitely want to leave a little bit of time to talk about that experience. Meeting the guys, I know you were on the panel also, which was really cool. I had some FOMO and some jealousy about that. I definitely would have loved to have the chance to go, but all right, man. Yeah. So the floor is yours. Tell me about like how did we start to have this conversation? How did you get into doing this? Meeting the people that you met. How long has been like you mentioned just a minute ago? 2 years you've been doing OBS. So yeah, let me know. I'm dying to hear about all of this.
Yeah, absolutely, man. So I guess when I first started, becoming aware of like, the government sucks and things like that. It was, I watched Zeitgeist in high school. So I was probably 15 at the time. Mm-hmm. And that sort of got me into the whole 9/11, false narrative and looking into that and really just not trusting the government. And from there, kind of dug into things like the Rothschilds, a little bit of like secret societies, the international banking cartel. And through my 20s, kind of fell away from it just a little bit because, life, trying to pay bills and work regularly and stuff like that. And it wasn't until 2016 started to kind of get back into politics. I feel like that was kind of the narrative for the whole country. Everyone was, picking a side and everyone hated Hillary Clinton. So that was good to see. And, as time progressed, obviously Trump won, then COVID happened. It was COVID that really kind of, got me back into the whole, well, I need to question the government and the things that they're doing. Cause just kind of seeing this global effort from all the world governments to work together on this narrative. And, you were seeing some of the practices that we saw in like China, being done, in like the most liberal cities here, but even a lighter version or so in conservative cities and things like that. And then, I was working from company to company. I think I've always just sort of had this like problem with authority. I don't like the idea of people telling me what to do. You can ask my parents. I've been that way since I was a kid, with teachers, bosses, all of that. And, it was in 2022 that I decided to quit working for other people and start working for myself. So I started just doing like streaming. I was doing very surface level content. Like I play video games, not so much these days. I'm always researching stuff, but I used to play video games a lot. So I would stream that. And over the course of the first year of streaming that stuff, slowly started to work in like political critiques and, cracking jokes on politicians and things like that. The Trump assassination and then immediately him picking JD Vance as vice president was kind of my waking up to it all, and really kind of seeing like, when I was 19 or so, I had a rough idea, but now I'm actually starting to get the understanding of like the nuances and how things work. And it wasn't until JD Vance got tapped, because I had never heard of him before, But I started looking into him, figured out who Peter Thiel was just last year. So this was probably July of last year, just to kind of give you an idea of recency to everything. And
Sure.
and as I started digging, I saw, his ties to like the NSA mass surveillance software and the stuff going on in Gaza, and realized that he was very, very interconnected to a lot of things. The Bilderberg Group, the WEF, he has, through Founders Fund, has all of these things. And it really, that's when I started to map things out, because it was so hard to keep track of everything that he was sort of involved in. And so I started doing that for my own research and just kind of keeping track of everything. And I started posting, different threads trying to tell people about Peter Thiel and stuff, not realizing that he's been very well reported on. But I still feel like a lot of people don't know who he is, or really like what the ramifications are of his involvement in all of these things. So I've tried to urge people like Ian Carroll, Sam Parker, and just different people that I was following at the time before I had any sort of presence. And I was like, hey, you really need to look into this Peter Thiel guy, and didn't really ever get any sort of response from them. So I was like, well, if nobody else is going to do it, then I'm going to do it. And from there, just kept posting and things like that. And really, it's kind of taken off ever since I joined Ikonic back in the fall of last year.
And how did that happen? You got to meet David. Did you meet David Icke directly, or was that through Gareth? Was that how did that kind of come together?
It's a funny story, actually. So Kristen Bidding is a member of Ikonic, and she was complaining about Ian Carroll, which is something that I do a lot, not by choice. It's just, I don't know what it is, but every time something of his comes across my feed and I see like the bullshit that's sort of weaved into it, I feel compelled to just immediately call it out and show like how it's not true, or sort of corralling people back into like the two-party narrative, or like the Q narrative and stuff. But she was complaining about him and how he was sort of being misrepresenting truths. And I jumped in and was like, look at all these times that I've tried to like talk to him about this, and all the candidates that he's endorsing and stuff. And then she was like, hey, I really like these web things that you're doing, showing her like the Peter Thiel stuff. And she invited me on the show, and we had a really good conversation, and that sort of got Rich Willett from Ikonic to reach out as well and schedule a show. And after that show, got into contact with Jamie, David's son. And from there, they sort of said, hey, we're looking for researchers and content creators and stuff to join the platform. And David really likes your work and was wondering if you were interested in coming on and doing a video series with us. And I said yes. And so it picked up from there. We started filming in January. I did the first season, which was 10 episodes, sort of shows like different paradigms of control, especially in the US. Goes into like the medical industry, technocracy, the Trump administration, how they normalize the agenda, like the different tactics that they use, the mainstream alternative media influencer sphere that we'll probably get into a little bit later, and just different things like that. And it capped it off with an hour-long interview with Vagabond Ryan.
Nice.
And I'm taking a little bit of a break right now from that, just to kind of get things set up, because I'm so new to all of this, and I see everyone with like Substacks and different video platforms that they're on and all these different things. And well, it doesn't pay as well as the YouTube gaming gig did, but I
For sure.
but I feel compelled to do it, so I've taken a hit. But luckily I've got like a partner that's kind of sees the vision, knows the importance and stuff like that. That's sort of helping me to build all of these things and stuff. So, it's I've never felt more compelled to do anything in my life. Sometime last year, I went from like looking at recent politics to looking at historical stuff, realized that it's kind of always been this way, and had a little bit of an existential crisis for a couple days. And from there, just I got on the other side of that, became extremely clear-headed, and said, I think this is what I was supposed to do. And I've been doing it ever since.
Dude. You know, I sometimes get like it's always been like this, and getting like that, getting over it in a couple days. I commend you, because there are days I still don't get over it, and I've been doing this 5 years. Yeah. My story is that I was a Bernie guy, and I got so pissed off at the corporate media after the way they fucked Bernie over that I'm like, well, we need to build an alternate structure, because there's no way they're ever going to allow us to have any kind of say whatsoever from the people. And then discovering just how controlled that entire space was, and who was controlling it and why, and then seeing what we've seen for the last 18 months and how they've controlled a narrative on a genocide and tried to whitewash that. And it just reinforced that like independent media is where it's at, because it's the only place you're actually going to get the real story that's going to break down why they're saying what they're saying on corporate media and what's driving that. So I think we're in the right, the same place there. That's great, because we need more people on this team. How do we get more people like wanting to actually chase this? Because what I hear a lot of is like, I see all this, but what can I do about it? Number one, it's all going to kind of happen anyway. It's all very depressing, and I don't want to spend all my time like focused on this. It's just, there's a lot of negativity, and what they want to do, bread and circuses. They want to unplug and watch Netflix and Hulu and Amazon Prime, and they want to watch sport. Pro sports is a huge distraction. I like MMA. I'll watch the UFC Saturday nights with my buddy, and that's where I leave it. Like it's not a thing. We again, it's something, a distraction for a couple hours a week. That's about all I get.
Yeah.
Yeah. So what do you do about that?
Well, it is tough, obviously, like some of the things that we look into, like you said, the genocide, the human trafficking, seeing that all of these things are interconnected and all these people are funneling money to each other, taking, billions and billions of taxpayer dollars, essentially away from us. And I think the thing that people need to understand is that if they truly do want things to change, and they're like fed up with the status quo that we've had essentially my entire life, at least, is you need to become aware of the problem. And that's kind of where I see myself sort of best rooted, is educating people on sort of how they're being deceived, the people that are doing the deceptions, where the agenda is going to go. Because I think that having that awareness and that education on like what to avoid, what to sort of cut out, because there's so much noise that gets propagated, especially by, mainstream alternative media. I don't think anybody watches legacy media on TV anymore, or if they do, the numbers are slowly declining over, time. And we have this new wave that's trying to like mislead people into certain narratives, or get people to just sit around and do nothing. And I realize that that's, exactly what they want, is they want people that don't feel like they have the ability to withdraw themselves from these systems. And I think it's the most difficult part is sort of shattering that reality that's sort of been built over time of people all the way from childhood. I know when I was going to school that it was America's always the good guys, and this is the way that the government works, and there's checks and balances. And like now that, looking back on all of that in retrospect, it's all bullshit, and it's a giant uniparty, and I think it extends beyond the United States government into a world government, and that there's sort of this facade that's being played of like East versus West that they always use, very similar to like Democrats versus Republicans. And so the education piece is so important, because people need to be able to understand exactly what's at play, what's being thrown at them, weaponized against them, who's responsible for it. And that sort of helps to, I guess, guide people away from the hope and belief investments in these systems that I feel like they thrive on it, always having that savior that's going to come in. And you have people like Thomas Massey, who are sort of in those positions where, you know, he's the good guy fighting from the inside. He's just always just so happens to be outnumbered. And I just think that it's really, really important that, you know, just like with any problem, the first part is like being able to acknowledge the problem, but how do you do that unless you know exactly what it is? And so you have all these NGOs and different capital investment firms and board seats with mutual people sharing all of them. And once you can begin to understand all of these things, you can realize that the only way forward is to sort of exit by any means that you can. You know, there's not ever going to be like a one size fits all solution, but it gives people the ability to think critically, and I think use this information to find ways to exit for themselves. So whether that's like getting off of big food and starting to network with like local farmers, or, you know, just networking with the local community and things that sort of get you away from digital currency paradigms, the international banking system, reducing the amount of taxes that you pay, if at all, and sort of go from there.
Yeah. I mean, there a lot of different directions I can go there. You mentioned the influencers and the mainstream alternative media network that they're now trying to see. It's just the most powerful, and I think that you've seen this also, is that the most powerful people recognize, especially over the COVID era, and certainly throughout the 2024 election cycle, that the narrative, the people that were controlling that narrative, that were able to drive that narrative, were more the podcast circuit. I think they even started to call 2024 the podcast election. Mm-hmm. And you know, people, of course, you've got Rogan, okay, but then you had like these little satellite channels like Theo Vaughn, all right, mm-hmm. And then on the other side, on the Democratic side, you had like Bert Kreischer and comedians on the other. They were trying, and what was really funny to me is that you noticed that anyone that was on board with Team Kamala, basically they had compromising material on. Yeah. I didn't see like any single person like enthusiastically come out and be like, yeah, that's my girl, you know, like, yeah. They were all just like, no, all right, I guess if you know, and then they were paid to show up and not even endorse. They did a concert or a thing. They didn't even really want to be affiliated with her at all. It was brutal. All right. Yeah. Whereas you've got Hulk Hogan ripping open his fucking shirt to be on stage with Trump, you know, Trump being the WWE Hall of Famer that he is, under the tutelage of Vince McMahon, naming Linda to be his education secretary, and the breakdown of just what the administration is, the craziness and clown show that administration is in itself, in who he's got named to each individual position, makes me bonkers sometimes, and at the same time makes me laugh. And this is what everybody wanted. This is what you asked for, I guess. You know, I've been out on federal electoralism for basically since 2020. Mm-hmm. The Princeton study proved that we have no influence on federal electoral politics without max donations. So to focus my time on trying to convince a politician to do XYZ doesn't seem to be the best use of my time. It's just how I analyzed it. And waking other people up to that. And my thing is none of the above. Like, I've been on team none of the above. You know, that you can, let's vote locally, let's vote for school board, and let's vote for the local commissioners. But federally, it's pretty much pre-decided in, you know, 40 out of 50 states, 43 out of 50 states before you ever walk into the booth. So I really try not to focus on that horse race that occupies so much space. And honestly, it's a big source of frustration for me. For the people in independent media, like, that's what corporate media is supposed to do. Focus on that left, right, Democrat, you know, Republican horse race, what's going on with Nancy Pelosi and this one and that one, and this one said this to that, and Jasmine Crockett and that, and there are channels that make a killing and they get a ton of views. They get amplified by YouTube. Okay. They get pushed by the algorithm, and it helps to set that narrative. And it's like, we are working 24/7 to try to undo that and undermine that so that people focus on what's really happening. And hey guys, don't look over there where they're trying to distract you with all the pretty ribbons and bows and funny stuff. There's horrifying shit happening right here that you're just not paying attention to because it hurts you to look at. And it hurts me to look at it too, but I can't ignore it. And
yeah,
too many people just want to ignore it and act like it's either not happening or what. I mean, that is a big source of frustration for me as an independent. And so what I do to counter that is I amplify the independents.
Yeah.
And that's the biggest thing we can do is to support independent media. Okay. And to support independent. Now, one thing I wanted to ask you is how you vet independent journalists. Okay. So you're new to this game. How do you figure out who's legit, who's been around a while, who's been doing this, who's kind of new and popped up and we don't really know what they're about? How do you kind of, is there a source that you go to for all of your news? I know some people use activist posts, for example, like Charlie Robinson just bought. But I'm just curious some of the other places that you look, because I've built stuff because I haven't really seen anywhere that aggregates it.
Yeah. That's an excellent question. I have a couple of rules of thumb that kind of put people on my radar, like red flags, I guess you would say. Mm-hmm. The first is getting people to continue to buy into the two-party narrative and the false dichotomy and things like that. And especially people that are spending efforts sort of re-endearing people into the state and the belief in the state. And I think that sort of raises that flag for me to go and sort of investigate people a little bit deeper. But the second, and I think this is actually extremely important, is looking at people's sponsors. There's this whole shadow network of larger capital investment firms that funnel money into companies that are a shell that host a bunch of other companies. And those end up sponsoring all of these people on Rumble and YouTube and Twitter and things like that. And it's just a simple case of follow the money. And there's a couple of recurring companies that come up and familiar faces, but also considering their following, their reach, sort of how fast they go from being, I'm using Ian Carroll here as an example. But the two-party narrative thing, believing in RFK, voting for Trump, backing Elon, and he's been, he had a meteoric rise, by comparison. And just sort of seeing that pattern of behavior of, you're presenting facts to me, but I'm still going to choose to buy into this narrative. People like Tucker Carlson, for example. I mean, he started out on legacy media. A lot of people aren't aware that his father was actually I believe he was the deputy director of the United States Information Agency.
For Voice of America, right?
Yeah. And so his dad, Dick Carlson, was appointed to that position in 1986 by Ronald Reagan at the height of the Cold War. But media from that agency was prohibited from being screened in the United States because of the Smith-Mundt Act. But in 2012, under the NDAA, Obama sort of he amended that so that it was able to produce media and stuff that could be produced in the United States. Somewhere along the way, I think in 1999, the USIA got rolled into the State Department. And then from there, it seems like from 2012 onward, has been this, they were funding newscasters and talking heads like Tucker Carlson on legacy media. And as that sort of started to die down, I think that money is going away from the legacy media channels and getting funneled into all of these other various groups. Specifically
podcasting and NGOs.
Yeah. Yeah. You have people like Sean Ryan, who's like former CIA. Like, I don't know about you, but I don't trust the CIA. And once you're in the intelligence community, you never actually leave.
Right. Yeah. He's got mega connections. One person I would contest on that might be Kiriakou, if any, because he whistleblew on them. So, that's someone that I could see not necessarily being part of it. But look, what's Fox? What's his name? Kennedy's daughter-in-law. I can't think. Amaryllis Fox, right?
Yeah.
For example, who he then nominates to become deputy CIA director because she's completely out and she doesn't want to be part of the deep state, right? She comes in to dismantle it. But of course she didn't get the gig, but he was pushing for it. And that I think was part of what he was trying to gain out of this. I mean, I did a lot of work on Kennedy. I had been very skeptical of his campaign from the minute he launched it. And people forget, I wrote a long article about this a couple of months ago with my buddy Reef. And he actually wanted to be a fucking Democratic president in 2024. He ran to be the Democratic leader. They didn't want to give him a fair shake, but he actually still stood up and declared and said, I'm a Democrat. I want to be a Democrat. People totally forget that now. All right. Then they did him so dirty and they played such games that he did what Bernie should have done initially, except that he was controlled opposition the entire time. And I think it was always planned for him to be sent in there as someone that would be ostracized by the Democrats, used as someone that could go independent and then lean more towards a Republican way. I think Bannon and Roger Stone and other people were behind that and had planned that masterfully 2 to 3 years beforehand, if not before. I think that he was used as a tool, and I think he was happy to be used. And I think that the whole Zionism thing playing into all of it, Rabbi Shmuley hanging out with RFK at the beginning of his campaign, there's a lot of things that I had a lot of questions with. And that didn't even get into like the weirdness with his personal family shit, which ended up blowing up on him a couple of weeks ago with this Olivia Nuzzi stuff. That he was sending dick pics to a reporter, allegedly. I don't know, but there was more of a relationship apparently, and maybe even her husband knew what was happening and was involved with it in possibly even extorting RFK over this stuff. We don't know, and it certainly leaves people vulnerable, and that's what we want to look at is why are people saying what they're saying, and what are the reasons why they're saying what they're saying if it doesn't make sense and align with who they are and consistently what they should be saying according to who they present themselves to be. And I think that's what hurts people is when you point out those inconsistencies, especially in people they like. Oh, well, fell for it again,
Yeah, it's honestly kind of crazy because when I start to do that myself, I notice that people will say things like, "Oh, you're purity spiraling," and it's like, okay, well, so are your expectations that everyone is supposed to be compromised, or is this like, are these things that we should be holding people to account for? Because it seems like there's exceptionalism every time that it's someone in their favor. We see that back and forth with both the left and the right. Where they'll make exceptions for their heroes, and it'll be the exact same thing that they complain about the other side doing. And to me, it's like our journalistic integrity is founded on holding all parties to account equally for the exact same things. And going back to RFK and like his, I believe he was being helped by Trevor Fitzgibbon. From Luminous Strategies, which just ties back to like Michael Schellenberger, and then you start getting like the Pritzkers involved, who have been involved with people like Hillary Clinton, Nancy Pelosi, Barack Obama, and things like that. So it's like the same old, Democrat establishment machine that's the other side of that right-wing machine was behind his campaign in the beginning. And, people like Bannon and Roger Stone and things like that coming in to sort of steer that ship once he wasn't nominated.
And then even Nicole, who was a DNC bundler, I call her like she's certainly uniparty through and through. Like, she sees herself as the person in between the Democrats and the Republicans, through and through corporate. I call her a bi-corporatist, right? Because it doesn't matter which party, as long as it's corporate, she's down. And I have questions about whether there are links to some kind of intelligence there. It seems that she's been in the right place in the right times, and things have happened for her seemingly pretty conveniently to set her up to be a very dangerous and powerful person for a long time to come. And I think a lot of people are sleeping on her, unfortunately.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I know that she went to Stanford, and in my opinion, that's another one of my red flags.
Harvard, Stanford, Yale.
Yep. They even have like declassified CIA documents that cover things called cloak and dagger professors, which is where the intelligence communities kind of like planted agents to be professors at various universities over the years. It was very prevalent, especially in like the late 70s, early 80s, all the way through the end of the Cold War. And Stanford was one of the ones that I've sort of read about. She met, I believe she met Sergey Brin there. And I mean, we all know Sergey Brin has tons of ties, founder of Google, World Economic Forum, funded by BlackRock, Vanguard. He went to Stanford, and that's where they met, and they were married. And this is after all of the Epstein Island stuff came out about him, and like him being at the edge and things like that. And Nicole Shanahan still married him and divorced him, became a billionaire. And, downplays things like Peter Thiel and the PayPal mafia. She was on a podcast recently saying like, oh, I don't worry about them having influence because they're predictable, which they kind of are. But that doesn't lessen the severity of their influence or the fact that people should be extremely concerned about those things. And then speaking to like, she phrased something very cleverly a few weeks ago. I think she was on with Megyn Kelly. And she said, we need to have a moratorium on mRNA technology until we figure out the science. And a lot of people don't realize that just means we're going to pause it, wait a couple of years, tell you we've figured out the science, and then push the same mRNA technology on you anyway.
Yeah. Well, she represents biotech, Silicon Valley. Again, Schellenberger, aligned as well. And a lot of, again, the whole thing with her that bothers me the most is that she straight up bought the VP slot for Kennedy and did it proudly, openly, and in public. Nobody called her out on it. Nobody seemed to care. $12.5 million was all she got, was all she had to pay to put herself on a national stage for until she can not maintain it anymore. But she's got now the money and power to continue to push things, and then back propagandists like Ian Carroll. And I will 100% contend, and he can argue all he wants, that she wasn't supporting him, paying him, inflating him. I truly believe that a lot of his meteoric rise was directly attributable to her and the Kennedy campaign, that they were paying to inflate and maybe even pump up some of his content. I have no evidence to prove that, but it doesn't make sense that any kind of conspiracy content like that would fly without some kind of amplification or promotion, unless it were connected to some other organization that were having the social media platforms do that for free, which we know they usually don't do.
Yeah.
So somebody was supporting that, his equipment got better, his studio quality got better, and he admitted that she paid him to fly up to San Francisco to interview her, which was weird as hell. And again, nobody seemed to really question or have much of a problem with it, even in the independent space. And he just blew it up. It's like, yeah, we just do that. No, Tim Pool had me flown into. You were a guest. You weren't the interviewer. Like,
Yeah.
how do you not see the difference in the dynamic of the relationship there? And the fact that she was looking to certainly get something out of him in pushing certain narratives. And he came out, guys, she's fucking awesome, guys.
Yeah.
She's the future. Like, just bought it hook, line, and sinker? Like, really? All right. That's where I really started to look side-eyed at him, because there were, early on last year, I even covered on my show, How Do We Miss That, a couple times. He did a thing about a CIA girl squad. He looked into one of the board members of Citigroup, and he did a deep dive with this Obsidian tool that he then told us about later on. And he then uncovers that she was part of this group, and they're part of this, and they were part of this. And it was really fascinating work. I have no idea where he got it from. Clearly, it came from somewhere. He didn't just pull it out of his ass just because he decided to look at every single member of a board one day. And I've done this for every member of every bank. And really? Okay. And then he also did one about GameStop. And that's what really piqued my interest with him, was he figured out a way to kind of layman's term explain why the hodlers were potentially still going to crash the market. And I found it interesting. And I still don't know if what he said is accurate or not, that the shorts never closed on GameStop. Are they really still open? Because if that's still the case, holy shit, that's still a mega news story that nobody's talking about.
Yeah.
Then he talked about the Vegas thing, and then someone was like, wait a minute, that's John blah, blah, blah's research stuff. And then you started to unravel the shit, and then he started to go full on Trumper, and then it just became like, oh my God. So he used that early cred to build up a group of sycophancy of people that would defend him no matter what, to the hilt. And now he's got like this little army of people. If you, God forbid, question anything he does, they'll just start swarming your shit, right?
Yeah.
And we've seen this with astroturfed right-wing commentators, and it's not just unique to Ian Carroll, by the way.
Right. I absolutely second your notion that he is completely bought and paid for. When I was actually like trying to look into sort of where that payment got made from Nicole Shanahan, I went on the FEC website, and I think there's a glaring blind spot where you can see where campaigns give money to social media platforms, but it doesn't say whether it's for like a promotional campaign or like an ad campaign or to pay to boost certain posts and things like that. And it just says, you know, payment to X, $45,000. And it's like, where is all that money going? And I think it was, you know, paid out to different influencer accounts, whether that's, you know, attributed to promoting their things or whatever that looks like. And that's not even taking into account like his podcast co-hosts and their ties to people like Brock Pierce, which is another like dark side of that. But it's
I'll tell you a funny story about Brock Pierce. You know, I watched, I don't know if you know, but Brock Pierce ran for president in 2020. Okay. So he was a part of the independent debate. That was actually what I consider to be one of the best debates I've ever seen in the history of this country. It actually dealt with issues, and he was fucking phenomenal. Like he's an actor. So he was able to deliver the lines in a way that he blew everybody else off the stage. And all of a sudden I started looking at this guy, and I'm like, yeah, this guy might be interesting. Blah, blah, blah. And I then learned about some of the connections. And then somebody goes, wait, you mean the Bitcoin douche? And I'm like, oh no. Yep. So then, yes, he's involved with Bitcoin. He's involved with Tether. He's involved with Israel. And he's been flying all over the world to promote Bitcoin. Like, that's a whole other scam that I would love to, at some point in this conversation, get into with you, is the question of, is Bitcoin real? Like, it's worth $100,000 right now, but a lot of people think it's an absolute Ponzi that's based on nothing. You see Michael Saylor buying up Bitcoin like crazy, borrowing money at stupid rates to be able to try to buy more Bitcoin, then buying it with his own stuff on what the fuck is going on here? Like, is this real, or are they trying to just replace money with this money? And how's that gonna work out? Like, I think a lot of people don't know. So I'd love to get what your take is on that. And then the link to Brock Pierce, where he's become like a multi-fucking billionaire out of this.
Yeah. I guess to sort of start with Bitcoin, I looked into the Satoshi Nakamoto email story that broke, like sort of how he reached out to all these various people. And three names were like the most prominent that I could find as far as all of the documentation and stuff. And that was Adam Back, who created things like Hashcash, and now he runs this company called Blockstream, which is just funded by this guy named Li Ka-shing, who's a Chinese billionaire. Obviously, you know, Tether was also founded in China by Brock Pierce. Then you have Nick Szabo and Hal Finney, who are both self-proclaimed transhumanists and subscribe to like the TESCREAL ideology, which is like, you know, tech, eugenics, space, and various other things that are very closely aligned with beliefs by like Elon. Elon, I would consider to be like a TESCREAL with everything that he sort of speaks about. Their main ideology is we're going to posit all of our products and services as the way to continue survivability of humanity. So whether that's through like CRISPR gene editing, or, you know, getting people linked up with like a brain chip, and what have you. And people like Hal Finney, you know, he supposedly came up with the idea of proof of work, which I still have to do some digging on that, but he's tied directly to like the Alcor Life Extension Foundation, which, as you know, there's like a bunch of prominent eugenicists that are wrapped up in that. I believe Jeffrey Epstein had some loose ties with people associated with that as well. And Mark Andreessen is like a self-proclaimed TESCREAL. I think he's...
Isn't Finney cryogenically frozen? Right?
I believe so, yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
So, yeah.
But yeah, so these were the three guys that were kind of giving that credibility to the Satoshi Nakamoto email story, saying, oh, he's this rogue NSA agent, and he wanted to take like their technology, which a lot of people, I think, still aren't aware that the encryption technology SHA-256 was created by the NSA. And if you dig back further into history, you can see that I actually have a little bit of a web here. It's not done. But I could show this real quick to show you like sort of the history of cryptography and things like that.
Yeah.
With them. Let's see here.
Yeah, I can put you big up on screen there. That's my screen. Put you big up. I don't know if you have. Oh, are you sharing that through StreamYard?
Yeah.
All right, hang on. Let me grab that. I don't really have a way to do that. Hold on a sec.
Oh, I could change my camera if you'd like.
Yeah. If you don't mind putting it on camera, like that's just easier.
Yeah, one sec. Let's see here. I think I can maybe just shrink myself down. Go from here. Let me do this instead.
There you go. Perfect.
All right. So, just looking at like the Satoshi email stuff, this is kind of everything that I was talking about. You have the how to make a mint, the cryptography of anonymous cash, which was a research essay done by the NSA. This is like the self-proclamation of being extropian transhumanist. You have Nick Szabo right there and Hal Finney. And as you go back, like you see the SHA-256 is connected to the NSA. And the NSA is tied to this thing called the SIS, and it stemmed from this thing called AFSAC. So that was like the precursor to the NSA, and they were working with this company called Crypto AG, which was basically providing cryptography ciphers for messages that were being relayed to countries during World War II. And what they were doing was selling this thing that said, hey, we have this machine that will encrypt all of your messages and you'll be able to sort of transmit them securely. Meanwhile, the entire time they had sold the technology to the CIA and this AFSAC to be able to decipher all of them. So it was like sort of a master key that was secretly given to the United States government, while every other country that they were selling these machines to believed that, you know, it was unhackable and that people wouldn't be able to decode them. So it was sort of this catch-22 where the government was able to, the American government was able to read all of these things and decipher all of these encryptions, while everybody else in the world was under the guise of, oh, well, you know, this technology's safe and things like that. And Crypto AG was actually a huge person that was a part of that was this guy named Boris Caesar Wilhelm Hagelin, who used to work for like the Nobel family and all of their ties to like, you know, big oil and all of these what would be military contract systems and, you know, things like that. You have Raytheon, you have BAE, you have United Defense, British Aerospace, Marconi Electric Systems, and obviously the Nobel Prize is named after them. So I'm just sort of seeing this as like a repetition of history, except instead of it being all of these other countries, that it's private investors. So, you know, people that are invested in Bitcoin and they're like, it's safe and there's a ledger and, you know, nobody can crack it. I don't think that that's true. Just based on my understanding of the last time that we dealt with like cryptography, the NSA, and all of these same sort of actors here. But you can look at things like Operation Rubicon, which shows like Swiss crypto manufacturer Crypto AG confirmed Minerva, and that they worked with the CIA and B&D all the way back in like the 90s. Crypto AG is actually jointly owned by the CIA and the B&D. Wow. They have this thing called the Friedman Collection, which is sort of like a history on cryptography itself that you can go look at. But it even says here, you know, partially released by the NSA in 2014, there was a gentleman's agreement between the NSA and Crypto AG through Boris Hagelin.
Right.
Yeah, and resulting in their cooperation from World War II, which was the encrypting all those messages and things like that while they were selling all of the keys to the United States government. That's
crazy.
And this shows like the sort of the I guess evolution of Crypto AG, because it's gone through like multiple iterations of names and stuff. But you have Psi1 and then Crypto International AG is what it's called now. But they have, you know, Operation Rubicon, you have Operation Spartan, Operation Gentleman's Agreement, Operation Thesaurus. And this shows like a timeline of ownership here. So in 1951 to 1960, the Gentleman's Agreement existed between Hagelin and the NSA. And Crypto AG had a licensing agreement with the American CIA. Sure. And it shows like through these different operations who was the actual owner of this company, and it went from being Hagelin to the B&D and CIA all the way to the CIA all the way up until now. So it's just sort of one of those things where it's like this is just the new evolution of that, but instead of stealing communications, they're just stealing everybody's money.
And then they spin it off and then they do something like a total information awareness that then becomes part of Palantir or the LifeLog. You know, these programs then become spun off to become commercial stuff, you know, and that's also part of what this is. And, you know, these CIA, NSA programs end up becoming like the commercial stuff that we end up having to consume and use on our daily basis, and know that there are these backdoors that are built into them globally that they can access the stuff if they need to, and shut down when they need to, and cause chaos where they need to, and all different kinds of techniques. It's not just about one method, and I think that's where a lot of people seem to narrow their thinking about the way that they approach this. Is they look at like a total information awareness means that you have to cater to people where they're at, no matter where they're at, which means you need to have counter agents to be able to meet those people where they're at there. And that's where I think the independent space has seen a massive influx in the last 5 years of new independents from that side of the community trying to infiltrate, trying to steer COINTELPRO, steer the narrative either back toward the duopoly or to steer the narrative away from what's actually happening, or to just focus on a nitty gritty. And this is the one that bothers me the most. To see somebody focus on a talking point or on one specific piece of information, whether somebody got something right or not. CIS versus CISA with Matt Taibbi, for example, that became like a whole big deal. Was whether he was correct about that? It didn't matter. The whole thing was, first of all, it was AstroTurf to a point, and it was a limited hangout that was designed to implicate Democrats much more than it was Republicans. That's where the evidence was. That's what the information that as a journalist they got. They should have asked those questions. I certainly would have run with the same thing, and I certainly reported on the Twitter files as it came out. And I think that there was a lot of legitimate shit that was in there. It was also personal. I don't think that Oppo research that's personal isn't discredited. It hurt the Democrats' feelings, but the fact that reinforced and that proved that the Hunter Biden laptop story was tampered with, and that the FBI and the tabletop exercise and all the things that were designed to propagandize and set up that narrative with the social media companies that this was coming and you better be ready to censor it when it does, is a serious problem that a lot of people just kind of glazed over and called, well, Hunter Biden's dick pics, right?
Yeah.
That was how they dismissed the Twitter files. Hunter Biden's dick pics. By the way, Marco Polo. You know who they are, right?
Not familiar, actually.
Okay, so Marco Polo assembled a dossier, a voluminous book documenting and researching every bit of the Hunter Biden laptop and all the contents that were in the diary and everything that was on it. And it's like a 500-page book, detailed. And they were ready to sue everybody. And then Joe gave his son a pardon, and the whole thing basically became moot. But now it's a story that they have that's out there. He absolutely did all this stuff. And they have the receipts. MarcoPolo.org. They're a 501c3, good organization, good people. They have a Substack. They've been putting out articles about this. They're still talking about it. But they had the goods.
It's actually interesting because you get into the Twitter files and like Matt Taibbi and how like David Sachs, Barry Weiss are tied into that. Michael Schellenberger comes back up again. You had things like the Manhattan Institute and Paul Singer's involvement as well, sort of in like a proximity sort of way, and that's where you get people like Christina Buttons and Chris Rufo and Bill Ackman's actually tied to like the Manhattan Institute and things like that. And it just seems like they wanted to take the entire truth and distill it down into this sort of weaponization where a lot of like independent movements and things like that, or say like where they censored independent journalists prior to the Elon takeover, and a lot of those ended up getting permanently deleted as far as like proof of censorship of a lot of those independent voices. I actually work with somebody who their Michael Schellenberger is my Peter Thiel, basically, where I sort of focus on a lot of the things that Peter Thiel's doing. Michael Schellenberger is like their big one. Yeah. And he's tied in with people like Medea Benjamin. He was involved with like the Venezuelan thing with Hugo Chavez. His Lumina Strategies actually is partnered with Fenton Communications, and Trevor Fitzgibbon is part of the Lumina Strategies, and that's where it comes back in RFK and things like that. So it just seems like it's all just one big incestuous web that's playing both sides at all times, and it's I think Lenin would be proud of the job they're doing right now.
It's very involved in it controls a lot of the narrative in California politics. It touches on Gavin Newsom also. You know, the Pelosi family, certainly. And Schellenberger likes to play both sides of the fence. I think it was you that pointed out to me that he was actually a Palantir lobbyist. Was that you or was that somebody else? That he was connected to Joe Lonsdale through some kind of a charity, and that charity claimed that they were leaning on him for certain advice on certain things. There's a lot of questions about Shelley too, you know?
Yeah.
I got a lot of questions. The whole Brazil thing, another crusader for free speech. But, you know, I hadn't really put it together in my head. But until now, the Twitter files, all the journalists for the Twitter files, none of them were anti-Zionist.
Right.
And I hadn't really thought about that literally until we were talking about this. You know, I didn't really look at it in that context because I hadn't really seen it in the Israel narrative context. But in Elon selecting journalists that would not be critical of Israel in their research and asking questions and digging in that direction makes a lot of sense to me. And the one that disappoints me the most, when it comes to that, is Taibbi.
Yeah.
And he has had the independent journalist cred for my entire life, just about, you know, and yes and no. Look, Rolling Stone, yes, but rogue reporter who didn't follow the rules and basically told everyone to go fuck themselves was the way I always kind of saw him, but allowed to go on Bill Maher, which I never asked the hard questions and never looked too deep. So again, I was a propagandized duopoly shitlib for most of my life, and I'll admit that. And in waking up, in seeing that there are not very, very many sacred cows when it comes to independent media, but there are a couple. Yeah. And it just so happens that those couple of them have been tied to Intel-linked communities and Intel-linked billionaires. The other one that I'll go into, and it's going to make people mad, Glenn Greenwald. Right? Glenn Greenwald has never met a billionaire that he didn't want to fund him. And it went from Pierre Omidyar, and then it went to, now he's in the Thiel universe. But it's not necessarily Peter Thiel that's funding him, but certainly there is a connection somewhere there. And I don't know exactly where it is, but they identified him early on as somebody they thought could be a vehicle for bringing in an independent community. The anti-Democratic Party, Hunter Biden, the former independent / Democrat leaning, left-leaning guy who's now certainly not left-leaning at all and has gone completely anti-Democrat. But what's interesting is that he hasn't really gone anti-Republican. Yeah. Thoughts on kind of the billionaire-controlled independent media? Barry Weiss is another one. Amazing how her company, within 2 years of launching on Substack, the Free Press, after that, launches $100 million outlet on Substack?
Yeah.
Come on.
Yeah, and then you have to take into account like her ties to the University of Austin thing and how her and Joe Lonsdale are connected, and she's connected to people like Larry Summers and Lynn Blatvinick, who, he's over like, I think he's on the board of Warner Music Group, and he's part of like Access Industries, which its subsidiary sort of works with the BBC. He's over Deezer. And it just all ends up coming back from things like Palantir and all these like shell corporations. Yep. Founders Fund is another one where it's like they'll fund something that funds the person. So it's like, I get accused a lot of playing like 6 Ways to Bacon with my research, and it's like, the sentiment that I like to convey is, that's how it works. That's how the world works, and politics and business and all of these nonprofit scams. It's who you know, and these same people will vilify someone's associations with Epstein, but then when you do it with something that's not Epstein, all of a sudden associations go out the window, and that's not a credible thing that could be motivating these people to do the things that they do.
I think it depends on the association also. Because if they work for a company that just happens to do business with somebody and they are not necessarily connected, profiting, or, that there are layers to that and levels to that. But I think that a lot of that gets swept up and implicates people where they may not necessarily have a link. What do they say? Causality is not necessarily connectivity or whatever it is. It just because they're connected doesn't necessarily mean that they're guilty of doing something. And there's also the clean side of each house that wants to make sure that they're not, that something looks like it's on the up and up. So they're trying to present a face of not what you should expect, of not what it really is. And it gets really hard looking through all this stuff too. And you start to go bleary, and then all of a sudden everything starts looking like an op, and it becomes kind of hard to see like where the line is and who's doing what and who's doing. I think that it's just you watch people's work over time, and time is the thing that reveals all to me. And I've had such an evolution in this space just in 5 years. I mean, I came into this supporting, it's embarrassing to say, but I was supporting TYT and Kyle Kalinske and the Democratic shitlib, progressive network. Yeah. And to the point where that's all insufferable, and it's bad for the country. It was bad for where we are right now because they pushed Joe Biden. I mean, I knew that from minute one, Joe Biden, nobody wanted Joe Biden. He was the fifth pick. And this is, to me, look, we haven't had a selection since 2008. I feel like the country selected Barack Obama. We were sold a bill of goods, but we certainly chose him. We got what we wanted. We saw this guy. He was dynamic. He was this. He was a liar. He was controlled by the banks. He was completely manipulative, and then had record opposition to anything that he wanted to do. In all fairness, he had lockstep filibusters like no one had ever seen before. There were certainly moves that were made to deter his presidency, partly to make sure that I think that no person of color would run for president for another few decades, to tank and torpedo that candidacy and that presidency. And he still won re-election in spite of all that. But, we didn't get what we wanted in 2016. At least half the country didn't. Nobody wanted Hillary Clinton. She was running. So I think everyone was glad that she didn't win. But I think a lot of people certainly didn't want Trump to win the first time. I didn't. I never got the successful businessman narrative with him because he inherited the money from his dad. He torpedoed every business that he'd ever been part of, including fucking casinos in Atlantic City that printed money. All right. I mean, and then there's this guy who bloviates about making people successful and being successful, yet he can't trumpet 5 people on stage who he's helped make successful that would credit their success to him, which is what billionaires do, right? Like, I can't stand Bloomberg, but Bloomberg can trumpet a whole bunch of people and businesses and things that he's created and wealth that he's created as a result of what he's built. This guy hasn't built very much other than to serve himself. And when you have, and now the whole thing about his net worth that's been inflated in the last couple of years, primarily by crypto and this fraudulent, and I'll call it fraudulent, DJT stock. Okay. This entire move that he made to go public with the Truth Social vehicle. Okay, that he's amazingly, Devin Nunes is still running that organization. I shake my head. Okay, but it's crazy how this guy, because of the on paper stuff, the Trump shitcoin, meme coin that was pumped on Solana, that's still worth a few $1 billion, and he holds 80% of the coin that never got put out to the public to begin with. Like, nobody knows anything about this stuff. It's remarkable how much this guy is profiting every day while he's tanking the economy simultaneously.
Yeah, absolutely. And you know, a lot of people aren't aware, you know, I've seen a few people talk about Trump's mentor Roy Cohn in the past. A lot of people aren't aware that Trump straight up got bailed out by the Rothschilds in the 90s. So he's, you know, been on the hook with them. But in the 80s, he was working with people like Stephen Witkoff, who, you know, is like the special envoy to the Middle East. Stephen Witkoff's son, Zach Witkoff, is on World Liberty Financial, which is a crypto exchange. And the other two people that lead it are Trump's two sons, Donald Trump Jr. and Eric. And, you know, you see sort of similarly to what we saw with Elon when he was pumping and dumping Doge. They're doing that same thing where they're like, hey, buy this now. I think Eric Trump said, buy Ethereum now, you'll thank me later. And then now, since then, Ethereum's down like 50% in value. And I think what we're seeing is all of these millionaires, billionaires are also invested in these things. We have like institutional investments in cryptocurrency with things like Apple, Tesla. You know, Howard Lutnick says he has hundreds of millions of dollars in crypto investments. And I think they're holding these massive amounts. And, you know, once the price starts to go up, they'll and reap, you know, rewards in like a collaborated effort, I believe. And essentially what that does is it absolves them of accountability where, you know, if the dollar were to tank, right, we hold the American government responsible for that. And they're accountable for the failure of the dollar. Or, you know, if a company's stock tanks, you have a board, a CEO, the chief financial officer, and things that you can hold accountable. But when it comes to crypto, all of a sudden everybody is in equal, we all have equal responsibility. And if that tanks, it's just the will of the market. And I don't think that's the case.
Well, there's no Bitcoin office, although they're trying to establish Bitcoin offices. But nobody like is the owner and the, you know, the person who's backing Bitcoin. And that to me, you know, I read an article the other day on my show about Michael Saylor and Bitcoin, and basically how Saylor tried to compare Bitcoin to real estate, except that real estate produces rent or some kind of a monthly, you know, investment or, you know, return on your investment that Bitcoin never will. And therefore, the only way to acquire more Bitcoin through his shares is that he has to raise new capital through new investors, which is the classic signs of a Ponzi. That and he's borrowing, and in order to service his debt load, he's got to borrow more money to service the debt load and borrow more money, and then he's cashing out a little bit and buying Bitcoin with that on his own thing, and then cashing. He's a lunatic, that guy. Just to get into a little bit of the web of what that guy's doing. I don't know if you've done any digging on Michael Saylor and MicroStrategy yet. He's one to certainly get into at some point, but you know, they're claiming that he could potentially, because of the way that he's been buying Bitcoin, and eventually he's going to margin call and not be able to meet his debt obligations, he'll have to start selling off Bitcoin, his Bitcoin holdings, in order to be able to service the debt load, which will then tank the market because he'll flood the market with so much Bitcoin, it will then drop the price of Bitcoin and he'll have to offload that much more.
Yeah.
It's fucking nuts. Okay. And I think, again, now remember that all this is cash is going in, Bitcoin's going out, cash is coming out of the market also. It's going into Swiss bank accounts, cash is going into Cayman Islands bank accounts. And I don't know if you remember, this is before you got into it, but last April, a guy self-immolated. All right. His name in New York City. And I don't remember his name, but he put out something called the Ponzi Papers on Substack. And he basically called out that he saw the crashing of Silicon Valley Bank as a massive Ponzi scheme, as the beginning of the end of the crashing of a Ponzi scheme that he saw, tried to warn everybody about, and did not want to be a part of.
Yeah.
And it was a fascinating read that I read, and I keep going back to it because there are parts of it that he was right about. And then I had a lot of questions about who put this out, how and why. Apparently threw this pamphlet up, then lit himself, did the whole thing and died. And M. Crosby was the author on this thing, but that wasn't his name. His name was Max Azzarello. That's what his name was. I don't know how I even forgot it for a second. And one of the interesting things was that he said that it was partly tied to the Simpsons writers, and that the Simpsons somehow had links to all this shit, which was wild, right? And but the Simpsons had a lot of Harvard and Stanford connected people that were able to kind of foreshadow things, and they planted stuff allegedly throughout. It was just fascinating, and the questions were, he only used like Wikipedia and corporate media sources to tell his story. And our questions were, well, if you're telling the story about Bitcoin, Peter Thiel, Silicon Valley Bank, and all that, how do you never mention Whitney Webb? How do you never mention any of the independent research that has been done to expose all of these things to prove what you're saying is the real thing? Yeah. Rather than just linking to a stupid Wikipedia article that we know is manipulated by CIA. That's why I had weird questions about it. But at the same time, there were accuracies in there. And this is where, you kind of have to sift through everything you see to pull out the nuggets of truth. What are they actually hiding in there and burying within the rest of the story and the show that they want you to fall for, that ends up becoming an important fact of information later on when you can connect that to something when you see it. And I think that's something that you do very well, from what I've seen.
I appreciate that, and I know a lot of my research tends to link to like mainstream media sources, and there is sort of a reason behind that, because as you know, like you said, they will put nuggets of truth in those things, but then it's buried in like layers and layers of propaganda, false narratives, and things like that. But focusing on those little nuggets of truth and being able to interconnect them and then link it all back to like mainstream sources. Now they can't call it fake news, right? Because it's coming from them, and things like CNN, Fox News, all these things that we all know are probably working on behalf of the government. But when they try to like disprove something, I sort of see that as like a little bit of a thing in my back pocket, where it's like, well, you guys are the ones that are saying all these things. I'm just finding the one thing that's relevant or pertinent and tying it back. But I definitely think that independent media, and especially people like Whitney Webb, she's been mentioned how many times on Joe Rogan, but she hasn't been invited on ever. But Joe Rogan will happily talk to Peter Thiel, and invited him on, I think it was October, September of last year. And it's really, really hard, because you can't actually teach discernment without, I think, like years long. And I've always been sort of cynical. And so that's where mine sort of stems, is I always keep high hopes, but low expectations for basically everything that I dig into. And I'm like, okay, well, let's see what we can find, because something about this just doesn't feel right to me. And I think that the trusting the gut and being able to find those little nuggets of truth and extrapolate those into a bigger picture, and then zooming out and sort of seeing all of these different things is extremely important, and something that I try to do on like my live streams, where we build these webs in real time, and the chat is open to everybody. Everyone's allowed to come in, and if it's something like somebody's knowledgeable about, they might have 50 followers on their account, but they have actual like legitimate information. And I try to show people how I like go through, verify those things in real time, be able to like pick out the important parts and try to showcase that, so that hopefully moving forward, people can emulate that sort of thing. But it's tough.
That's it. It's listening for those narratives and listening for some of the buzzwords, trying to listen even across channels to hear kind of the coordinated message that you can see and hear sometimes happening, because they do disseminate talking points on both sides of the political, quote unquote, duopoly that they're trying to push this narrative and distract people, funnel them back into allowing the billionaire class and the donor class to control everything, including what people are thinking and how they're consuming it, and what they're eating. Look, drugs. I mean, look at the Pfizer stuff. How Pfizer took over corporate media, how they were sponsoring every stadium, and they were sponsoring all the news and every sporting event, and people never really, a lot of people still never question that. I think especially on the Democratic side, to be honest, people tended to on the right side, because of Biden being in office, I ask a lot more questions about what was going on with Big Pharma, on top of the fact that you had this ecosystem from the right side that was claiming, Great Barrington Declaration, that COVID was a hoax, that COVID was not a real thing. Now, I don't know if it's not a real thing, because certainly there are people that were affected by it. Was it a bioweapon? I think it was. Was it created in a lab? I think it was. And was it released in order to scare the shit out of people and cause a lockdown and create this environment where they could create the largest massive upward transfer of wealth in history? I don't see anything that says that it wasn't set up that way. When you look at Event 201, when you look at the cyber reason, I think it was called, and all of the tabletop exercises that were happening in the few years beforehand. And then the other thing, I don't know if you ever caught Kim Iverson, actually, and I'm not a Kim Iverson fan, to be honest with you, but she did an interview with somebody in, I think it was January of 2023, that basically admitted that it was controlled. It was a DOD op the entire time. All of our COVID policy was run by the Defense Department. All of our response policy and how we directed cities and everything was done by the Defense Department. And again, that was something that very few people reported on, but I think was a big component that got missed, because that told me it was a military operation. Yeah. They saw it as some kind of war.
Yeah, in the even in the Congressional House report, which, I always take everything coming from the government with a grain of salt, but even they admitted, like, Operation Warp Speed itself was a merging of the DoD and Big Pharma aspects. It removed, liability for vaccine manufacturers, so people that are vax injured are just having that much more of a difficult time seeking, like, recouping damages or trying to find some way to hold these manufacturers liable. Trump called it a success. And then, now Susie Wiles being his chief of staff, through her ties to Mercury Affairs, she's wrapped up with Pfizer. We have Johnson & Johnson is involved with them, AstraZeneca. So, like, all these same people that manufactured the COVID vaccine that apparently Trump got duped, which I don't think is the case. But he ended up putting someone, Susie Wiles as chief of staff, and she's a big shot caller in his administration and stuff. And she's directly tied to all of these companies. Yeah. And just like looking back through like the last 100 years or so of the medical industry, and sort of how that was co-opted by, like, the Rockefellers, and they were funding people like Mary Lasker, who was, started the whole lobbying thing, lobbying politicians for money for grants to do these medical research studies, and sort of that transformation of the medical field into the medical industry. And a huge, tie to the Rockefellers is, like, their work with eugenics, and just looking at the I guess philosophy behind vaccines is it reduces the body's ability to create antibodies, and you're supposed to be able to develop those naturally within the body. And I think that they're acting as immunosuppressants, essentially, where, over time it's training the body to produce less and less antibodies naturally, and artificially injecting all of these things to lower people's immune systems. And this is a crazy harebrained theory, but I think it's to ready people for the eventual implants and, like, biotechnical stuff that's coming in human augmentation in the very near future, because it's going to reduce the body's ability to fight these things as foreign objects.
Elon's brain chip time.
Yep.
Nice. Oh, I can't wait. Again, predictive programming from Hollywood, The Matrix. This is that was sitting in the chair and getting plugged in and having knowledge and whatever dumped into your, that's literally how they're going to sell it to us. And it's really, somebody put up a thing the other day. It's like, we're somewhere between Minority Report and the latest Mad Max movie. It's like all these things that I'm looking forward to all these things coming true. Like we're already halfway there. And that's something else that I've always kind of looked at on a conspiracy side is the predictive programming of Hollywood movies, influence of the U.S. government on Hollywood. I even saw some report somewhere once that they literally have like a pseudo separate Hollywood that they've kind of established separate from the real one that makes their own films and everything else. And it's like buried somewhere else for the future, for the history of time to kind of plant another entire narrative and history. I've heard all kinds of crazy shit. But the one who I've really been glowingly seen linked to Intel in the acting world is Clooney. And I don't think that that's much of a surprise to many people. I don't know if you've really done much digging on that. He kind of came on my radar when it came to the Assange stuff. Now he created something called like the Clooney Foundation for Journalism or something. And they didn't really, it was very strange. They were pro-white helmets, but they were pro-Assange. They had a lot of people connected from some of the top firms. There was a lot of Intel connections. His wife had Intel connections, I believe, in Egypt. There were a lot of weird, and then you look at his movie history where he's played CIA agents how many times, and you look at Confessions of a Dangerous Mind, to Three Kings, to Ocean's movies, and so many different things that were set up that puts him in different locations for certain things. And it's really like Confessions of a Dangerous Mind. It almost felt like they were telling you exactly how they did it to him. Yeah. It was almost, it sounded like it was the Chuck Barris story, but it was almost like, how did they co-opt George Clooney? And have him running operations around the world, even when he had to run a film somewhere in some off weird location. I wonder why he had to do that. Like, they set the whole thing up. Argo, same thing. The movie Argo, they talked about that whole film thing was the whole reason to get the hostages out of Iran. That was an entertaining movie. And of course, then what they do is they whitewash the real story, just how badly they behaved. Right? They make it seem like America was good, like you said early on, like we were raised to be propagandized that America always does the right thing for the right reasons, and we came out on the good side always. And we just know that ain't so. And especially looking at the people that have been running this world for the last 25 years, people say that it really started with Poppy Bush and Bill Clinton. And that Bill Clinton was controlled by the Bushes and CIA in a way, manipulated, bringing the right, the conservative Democrats and basically eliminating and destroying any kind of left movement that there was in this country at that point. And ushering in the neoliberalism that we've been suffering under for the last 40 fucking years.
Yeah. Honestly, if you want my genuine personal opinion, I think America's always kind of been like this experiment where you had things like the Sabbatine Frankists sort of helping to influence the French Revolution, and then the establishment of the Illuminati in 1775, and then all of a sudden America becomes this. We start the revolution. We're being funded by the French, who were fighting with the British at the time, and all the founding fathers' ties to like Freemasonry and stuff, and especially through the 20th century, you had this thing called the New School for Social Research, which it still exists today. It's usually just called the New School, but that included people like John Dewey, who was considered like the father of education in the 20th century, and he ended up going to like create various models that other universities and stuff, especially in the United States, they pull a lot of inspiration from that, and that's sort of where you get this convergence of Alvin Saunders Johnson, who was running the new school. This was like 1919 was when it was founded. But Alvin Saunders Johnson, who worked for Rockefeller, you had Thorstein Veblen, who inspired the technocracy movement of the 20th century. You had people like Hannah Arendt, who was very influential and believed in this thing called like transactionalism, which I think is where we're heading with like carbon credits and cryptocurrency and things like that. You had people like Leo Strauss, who was friends with Franz Rosenzweig, who was a huge fan of Hegel, and that's where we get all this Hegelian idealism and stuff, which they were, thrilled about the French Revolution, because they saw that as sort of a vacuum to be able to push all of these new ideas and philosophies, and that's where you get the false controlled opposition. And I mean, this goes all the way back to like the late 1700s, and I think it's all been sort of just this giant psyop on us.
Just a continuation. So the family's involved. So, we're like the generations down, the children, the offspring, and then the married offspring to that. And it kind of diverges. And then some businesses kind of come in and take over a certain thing, and industries come in, and then you've got CIA that gets involved, and then In-Q-Tel. I mean, I don't know how much work, research you've done into In-Q-Tel and just how many companies they've funded, how involved in the business world they are, and just how deep their technology ties go. I think a lot of people dismiss that, or just don't know.
Yeah, I think that especially when you look at things like Oracle, right, where Larry Ellison starts Oracle, and it's like this VMware. Where he can start doing like cloud storage for all these different companies, and his first customer was the CIA. Now everyone that works with Oracle is storing all their information on Oracle servers, and that's all getting fed through like different intelligence agencies and things like that. And then now fast forward to a month or two or a couple months ago, and now Larry Ellison's part of this huge Operation Stargate thing, and he's a eugenicist, big tech, rubbing shoulders with people like Sam Altman, who's being funded by Peter Thiel. So it's like, especially since the 80s, things have sort of been accelerating. You have all kinds of actors who are doing all of these cloud storage services. Amazon Web Services, for example, like a lot of people don't know that Jeff Bezos's father was in like big oil. His grandfather was the one of the founding members of DARPA. And it's like, Google wasn't started in a garage. All of these different like false narratives and false hero stories, they've started this trend of pushing government technology and goods and services through the private sector, because if the government were to release it to the public, nobody would trust it. But if you have this, I started from nothing and, built up this company, when in actuality it was always either the government or intelligence agencies, or like you said, the big companies that come in, people like Rockefeller, Carnegie, and all of these things through these various industrial revolutions that we've seen.
And then you've got the entire nonprofit NGO world that has realized that as a way for these billionaires to write off their pet projects and their infiltration projects, which is unbelievable, that they figured out this nonprofit world that can now fund all of their their infiltrations. We've seen a lot of that happen to the independent space. Soros is one of the kings of this, and he's demonized by the people, by the people on the right as being the person who funds everything on the left. It's not just Soros. There's Bloomberg too. There's Schwartzman, and there's plenty of other big money. Eric Schmidt, big money influencers that are funding all kinds of NGOs. Who's the other guy? One of the other co-founders of Facebook. I can't think of it. Dustin Moskovitz. He's become one of the largest Democratic Party donors over the last few years. and people are sleeping on him. And it's like, you've got to keep your head on a swivel. How do people do that? You know, and keep up with real life, pay their bills as things continue to spiral out of control in the world. You see your portfolio dropping. There's hysterical news driving you crazy. You've got family polls, friends, and real life type of stuff. Like, balancing all of this stuff is very difficult. And then also maintaining a perspective and not letting it get to you. And honestly, my wife says to me that she feels like it gets to me at times because I surround myself in news which is constantly negative. And I'm seeing, unfortunately, 2 a.m. every night before I go to bed, I'm seeing kids blown up in Israel. And that sucks. You know, it's horrible. And I'm not just going to turn it off and be blind to it. First of all, I'm in news and I want to know what's happening in the world. I want to know what's being done in my name, on behalf of my country, what we're funding and why, and then try to educate people so that we can stop it and try to undo this. But again, like you said, it starts with education. And I think too many people are just happy to stick their heads in the sand. And that is still worrisome to me. That is the game that we fight against. And I think that what we need to try to figure out a way to do is make it more entertaining, sadly enough, because, you know, where we're losing is because we're losing to entertainment. And that's where people like to say this infotainment thing and the mix between being funny. You know, that's why I think comedians do a really good job. And I've always been a big fan of stand-up comedians and as truth tellers. Okay, from the Carlins. Again, I come from the school of George Carlin and Bill Hicks and even Dice Clay to a point, but Eddie Murphy and Richard Pryor and Paul Mooney, some of the people that just hold it like it was and didn't give a flying fuck. And we're able to kind of see the game for what it was, and sometimes they played the game, but they were able to kind of warn everybody else about what was happening and do it in a funny way. And I think the people that connect and resonate the best are the ones that can figure out how to do that. And I still think that the thing that worries me is the minute you find somebody that kind of dynamic and good at that, corporate media tends to take over and want to co-opt them. Carol, what? And they thought, honestly, like, he came out and he seemed like he might have been decent, but the big money saw that he could be used as a vehicle. And I think that if it will take a very special kind of person that will say, I recognize that people want to do this with me. I'm not going to do that. And I'm going to run in the opposite direction and poke them in the eye constantly. And, you know, I think we're still waiting on that person. I think, you know, certain people have emerged, but it hasn't really taken off. You know, they thought it was Rogan for a while, but man. Yeah.
I've got some webs on Rogan, and now I haven't done the research, the justice that people like Matthew North did in the past, but just sort of seeing like, oh, it's tying back to Israel again. Oh, okay, that's also tying back to Israel. Oh, this is Tully and Friedman who were, you know, connected to the Salomon Brothers and World Trade Center 7, or, you know, whatever that looks like. I think he's funded or he's sponsored by Oracle now, like directly. And you know, I like to think that I'm funny. Most other people don't. Usually, when I tell a joke, I'm the only one laughing, but that's all that really matters to me. But I have made it my like personal stance. I'm like planting a flag in the ground where I don't want to take sponsorships. I don't. You know, I'd rather if people do want to support me and, you know, see me continue the work that I'm doing, consider like donating or like buying merch or something like that. But anybody that tries to offer me money, I even made a post about this recently. I'm just gonna leak the email. I don't care. I'm not you know, I've always been not well off, and I've kind of made peace with the fact that I'm gonna die like not well off. And so, you know, I'm not trying to like make thousands of dollars or get sponsored by X, Y, and Z. And I think that's where people generally tend to like lose sight of things. And once you have that money coming in and that income source, now they can use that against you. What was a carrot then ends up becoming a stick, where they say, well, you have to talk about these certain things, or you can't mention X, Y, and Z, or otherwise we'll reduce the amount of money we're giving you, or we'll stop working with you, and things like that. And that I think it's really, really important for people to sort of take that stand and be like, nah, I'm being funded by, to rip PBS viewers like you. And that way they're able to like maintain that independence and not have to worry about what's being said, or, the topics that they cover and stuff like that. So I think I need to work on the being funny part. And the rest of it, I think, is sort of working in my favor.
Well, you got a lot of funny people around you, so that's a good start. And studying what some of these people do, some of their deliveries. I work with a guy, Jesse Jett, who's an incredible performer. He's in art. He writes. He's a singer, songwriter, poet, and he can be freaking hilarious, even unintentionally. I try to absorb from everyone a little bit, and I think we all try to do that. And he's just an incredible performer, entertainer. I notice that he doesn't at all, and I tend to so there are
me.
things that I try to work on. Game film, as we do this, I want to improve what I'm doing and make what I'm doing more appealing to people, because I think I wouldn't be doing it if I didn't think it was important. And I feel like our reach is suppressed heavily because of the topics that we talk about, and because of the people that we are trying to talk about, and the countries that we are trying to talk about that are connected to the people that we are trying to talk about. That none of that works in our favor. And I totally agree with you on the value for value, user-funded aspect of this, not taking sponsors. We've never taken a sponsor donation. It's all been user-funded on Ko-fi and PayPal and even Stripe through Substack. I am not a believer. This is something I've gone back and forth with Steve over at AM Wake Up about a lot, is about monetization and the challenges that creators have to deal with just to be able to be paid out fairly, and to the hoops we have to jump through and the amount of fees that we have to go through in order to be able to get money either into our bank account or spendable is ridiculous.
Yeah.
And guess who ends up making money off of all those fees? It's Peter Thiel and it's Mark Andreessen, and it's those same guys that have set up the PayPal Mafia, all the online stuff, or it's Jack Dorsey who runs Square and Stripe and Cash App. And then again, you got PayPal with Venmo and PayPal. You've got Andreessen Horowitz is principal funders of Stripe, and they're also principal funders of Substack. So that's been a big thing that I've had a problem with Substack personally, is that Andreessen Horowitz is double dipping on the monetization. They're making money both on Substack, which gets 10% of any fees that are collected, and then they're getting money from, as a percentage owner of Stripe, that's getting, 2.5% or whatever it is on every transaction on top of the Substack fee. It's just, I've said to Substack, guys, you've got a conflict of interest here. As a single payment processor, I get that Mark Andreessen's your owner, and I get that he owns them too, and that he would like for you two to not have any other competitors of his involved, but Stripe has cut off a lot of people. You mentioned that you talked to Ryan Christie at Last American Vagabond for your Ikonic series. I did an article last June about him getting demonetized from Stripe. So Stripe was changing their terms of service, and they decided that he was a crowdfunder, and they put some kind of rule in him on him and told him they were terminating his account as of June 10th. I started to write. I wrote an article about this. I raised holy hell with the heads of Substack. I don't know if it actually had any kind of impact directly, but 2 days before he was supposed to be terminated, all of a sudden they reinstated his account, and thank goodness. But what I did was, in researching this, I started to ask questions like, was it just Ryan, or is this like a widespread thing? And it kind of was. On top of the fact that what I learned was that Stripe doesn't even operate in half the countries around the world, and therefore Substack wasn't allowing creators to monetize in those countries. Why wouldn't you want to take 10% of those creators' monetizations also by going with an online payment processor that's willing to work in those countries? And I found one. I even found one. I brought this to them and gift wrapped it, and they didn't want it. That told me something too. And it's why I've been looking kind of at doing my own self-hosted thing, but using the Substack as a vehicle to drive people to a self-hosted environment, preparing them for the day that Substack's just going to say enough is enough and we're done with you.
Yeah.
And I see that with Rumble too. Rumble and locals is not going to be much different.
Yeah, it's tough because it seems like every sort of channel that you have to get information out there and stuff does end up ultimately like funneling money back up. You know, Peter Thiel's investments in Rumble. I think JD Vance also is.
Yep. Naria.
Yeah, and you know, it's tough, especially for me, because like you know, I don't come from like any prominent family. I don't have like a nest egg anywhere. You know, I'm living, you know, month to month, just like everyone else. And I started to inquire about the costs of, well, what does it cost to host, you know, videos and a video library that people can go check out, and you know, a live chat system or something like that to kind of emulate those same things. And it's expensive.
It's significant. Yep.
Yeah, I literally cannot afford it. And it's one of those things where, you know, as I'm starting to grow, I'm hoping to, you know, obviously I'm trying to monetize through these various channels and stuff, but building up that to where I can slowly start my exodus. So I'm starting that with like Twitter and getting into, you know, Substack and doing my own merch and stuff. But it's going to be this tiptoeing away from that to where I own everything from front to back, even if that's like working with a small independent, you know, payment processor that isn't connected to all of these things. That's something that I've been considering as well. Working with somebody that is independent for like producing my merch and stuff. Right now, I'm just going through Streamlabs, which is not a great company. I'll put that out there. I don't think that they are, but it's the only thing I can afford. You know,
yep.
It's one of those where I'm slowly building up to be able to have that ability to host my own website, host my own videos and things. But I think in the last, since 2025 started, I think I've made like $300. So it's not going as well as I'd like. And I always have this personal conflict of like, well, I don't want to seem like I'm, you know, marketing myself or just like in this for the grift or something like that. So I always forget to like plug my stuff and push people to those different revenue streams, because everyone needs money just as bad as me, and I'm like putting myself in people's shoes. So it's something that I've been kind of contending with as well.
I feel the same way, man. And to ask people for money, knowing how crunched they are, knowing how many creators and how many choices there are, and how expensive things are right now. Okay, so this is the website that I built with a developer called Indie News Now. And what you're talking about is a live element with a chat. And when we are live, we are able to embed this, but there is no incorporation of a live chat yet. We're working on embedding a Discord channel, because apparently you can actually embed a channel where it can actually show the live back and forth. And if you're a Discord user, you'll be able to interact with it. We are evolving and moving this forward. I also am able to, through Restream, grab a version of the chat, which can just be like a read-only scroll. And I know you use social streams. I think you may be able to plug a social streams type of environment in here where you can then show a live chat to people on a website as well. Just a little bit of inside baseball for the people. Now, we also embedded our own monetization here. Now we are doing Stripe, so they can use Google Pay, Amazon Pay, etc. to hook us up via Stripe, but it's done via API directly, so no other platform needs to get paid and get a piece in between Stripe and us. So it's only one processor. That's not as bad. And here's our merch store. We use Spring, or they used to be called Teespring, and it's all kind of pay as you go, one-off type of stuff. Sometimes it may take a few days for them to put in a run, and then they'll send it out, maybe weeks. but we've been and we sold a decent amount of merch. A few things here and there, not a whole lot, but it's there for anyone who wants it, and I've had fun making it. But I think that it is important to eventually do your own thing, to host your own website. Now, this actually embeds and brings in content from TLAV and ProPublica and Consortium. So, when I asked you about where you're finding news sources, I tried to build something that from one central place gives you a place to go to find a lot of independent news that sometimes it may be biased a little bit towards the Democrats, sometimes it may be biased a little towards the Republicans, but for the most part, it's coming from independent, user-funded sources, most importantly, and non-corporate. And there's an infinite scroll, so you can just keep going and going and going and going on this thing.
Nice.
I'm going to work on bringing a video page to it that's going to bring in Rumble, and you'll be able to see things like this for Rumble streams and click right to the video on Rumble. That's the other thing that I wanted to build about this. If it's not my own article, I don't want to scrape it and house it here. I want to link it to wherever you can find it directly. All right.
Yeah.
And I think it's important not to steal that traffic from someone and to allow them to showcase their work in the way they want to do it. And just basically taking their thumbnail, title, and a little description, maybe a few tags, throwing that on a website. And now this is all searchable and indexable, which is really also cool.
And you control it, which is the most important part.
Yeah, and it is important. It's also not easy to maintain. We built in also a language translator that allows anyone who speaks any of these languages to convert the entire website. I don't know why you'd want to, but if you want to flip it into Hebrew, it will. It'll take a second. Where's my converter? Yeah, you know what? It might be my browser. Oh, there it is. There you go. So it literally flips the entire website into whatever language you want it to. Very cool stuff.
Nice.
So yeah, this is where I see us potentially leading. The people who get what's happening with corporate news and are looking for an alternative, we need to provide them with things like this in order to steer them toward the right places to look, so they're not going back to the MSNBCs and the CNNs and the Fox Newses. That's why we built this. All right, let's see. So some of your other favorite sources I like to ask. So you mentioned Whitney Webb and you mentioned TLAV. Anyone? Oh, you know what? I want to ask about Third Eye. We didn't get a chance to talk about Third Eye Carnival. So tell me about what happened in Nashville this week. Tell me about the weather. Tell me about your treacherous travel to get there, because everyone apparently has a story about traveling to and from the event. Tell me everything.
Yeah, absolutely. So showed up. Honestly, the drive-in was very good. I sort of live in the area, won't say exactly where, but was a nice little trip on the way in. We got there. It basically about 2 or 3 hours went by, just long enough to set up the tent, meet everybody, and then the rain started. And it was going basically all night as people were doing music. There was alerts going on for thunderstorm warnings and things like this. I think there was even a flood in Nashville itself. It basically rained all through the day, all through the night. We had this barn and sort of a place where Pasta was cooking all the food and stuff, and that was great. Big shout out to him. Every time I saw him, he was doing something to make someone a plate of food, and just asking for donations and stuff like that. And I thought that was really cool. Getting a lot of stuff from the Amish community and the Mennonites and stuff. So it's not going back into big food, and that your money's going into independent farms and stuff.
Did Slim make steaks? Did you have a Texas Slim steak?
I didn't.
No.
But he ended up smoking some brisket. And I ended up eating, I think 2 of the brisket sandwiches with Steve's barbecue sauce on it.
Nice. The hard R barbecue. I love it.
Yep.
That's freaking great.
Yeah.
So,
yeah.
Now, do you play music? Did you play on Friday night, or were you just kind of hanging out and listening and watching?
So I do music or have done music in the past, but the only instrument I can play is the trumpet, and I haven't done that since middle school. Trying to teach myself piano, but it was sort of one of those environments where, I would only be doing vocals, and then I'd have to have like the backing instrumental and things like that. But I especially wanted to see Ryan play and his songs. I hadn't heard his music prior to that, and a lot of the lyrics really resonated with me a lot. Ended up going on a trip the next day to like the gas station just to get some supplies and stuff, and listening to his SoundCloud and like hearing all of his songs on there. That was really, really cool. And then Scott Armstrong did his own set, which I thought was fantastic. There were some technical difficulties, which I can very heavily relate to, but I still think he did a really, really good job. And he's a really, really good guitar player. You had, I think it's Spiderland.
Yep.
They were there. Got to chat with them for a little bit. Really, really cool. Love the style of music that they do. Very experimental. Really, really love. They do portions of songs where he'll break down into doing raps, and that it kind of came out of nowhere, and was a very pleasant surprise. And they mix it all really well. And a couple of other acts went on, and it was a really, really good time. And just being able to like be around a bunch of like-minded people that actually exist and aren't bots on the internet was really, really invigorating, and shows what I think is like the desire for those sort of things. So completely away from corporate media and corporate funding. I sort of see it as like what I wish Bonnaroo would have always been. And obviously that's not the case. So the music aspect was really, really cool, and seeing that they're able to provide that like platform for themselves and their friends to be able to promote music that has a good message and is supporting independent artists and stuff. And the second night was the panel and the comedy. And I think that went really, really well also. I got invited up to the panel, and we were basically just talking about like the reason why we were there, sort of the things that we believe in and champion as a message. And then Kurt Metzger shows up out of nowhere and sits up there with Sam Tripoli, and they sort of go back and forth about whether or not nukes exist. Sam Tripoli said they don't, or the nukings of Nagasaki and Hiroshima were sort of propagandized to like nuclear radiation and all of these things. And Kurt Metzger just could not fathom it. He was like, there's no way. And, they went back and forth for a while, and that dominated a lot of it. Not upset about that at all. Got to chat with Sam a little bit. I was like, hey, I agree with you on the nuke thing, by the way. And we ended up exchanging contact info, and I'm hoping to link up with him soon and do maybe an episode of Tinfoil or something.
Sam's great, man.
And then the comedy.
He's a rip.
Yeah.
And
he's
then
extremely
Kurt,
down to earth.
So Kurt just showed up. What do you have, like a show in Nashville? Nobody knew he was going to show up. He just showed up out of nowhere. That's crazy.
Yeah, I can't remember the guy's name, but he had a set that he had to do at Zany's in Nashville. It's like a comedy club. And the whole time we were up on the panel, Steve kept being like, hey, do you want some edibles? Do you want this? Do you want that? I think that was really funny, because Kurt was like, no, dude, I have somewhere to be in 2 hours and I got to do a whole set. And that was great. But yeah, it was a huge surprise. I don't think anybody knew. I think he caught wind that Sam was going to be there, and kind of got a little convinced into going to surprise everybody there. And it was very interesting.
I was excited to hear Leonardo Joni said, because she's just a killer.
Yeah.
So, what were your? I mean, she seemed to be. I called her like Lisa Lampanelli without the black dick. I think somebody called her last week, and I thought that was a great analogy for her. She goes hard, right?
Yeah. It's honestly kind of invigorating to see, a woman in comedy that isn't making it about just sex all the time, which is really good to see. Because it seems like a lot of the times, female comedians and I mean male comedians too, that falling back on like the sexualization part of everything, but just being able to craft jokes that are more, about like social observations and observations about people, and then getting into the conspiracy thing, her jokes about Jewish influence and stuff landed really well there. And then she actually opened up the last part of her set for questions. And this is where I kind of like was especially impressed, because she was able to like joke with the audience in real time and actually say some like extremely funny things. And I think that quick wit and stuff that you see really like adds to the authenticity of it, because anybody can like have their jokes written for them, and it's really
to
hard
ad lib like that and be funny is hard.
Yeah, and that's where she like especially impressed me. I didn't get a chance to like meet with her and like chat with her for a second, just because it was like, hey, I'm in. And while she was doing her set, there were weather alerts going off for like tornadoes and stuff. How far back we were in the country, there's like almost no lighting outside of just being inside the barn. So once you go outside, it's like pitch black. There's mud everywhere. So it was kind of one of those things where she got in, saw the acts that went before her, and then after her set, she chilled for a little bit, met with a bunch of people that are big fans, and then dipped out, understandably. I actually ended up leaving later that night myself.
Nice. That sounds like an amazing weekend of meeting the people that you only really see online. I got to meet and hang out with Steve and Pasta when they were in Vegas a couple of years ago. And that, again, it takes the relationship to another level, and the familiarity and the knowledge and friendship and understanding and being able to kind of have a conversation. There's such a divide today that anything to really bring people together like that, I think, is just super important. And kudos to Steve and Ryan for putting something like that together. And Tease, of course, for coming up with the idea in the first place. And all right, so this was awesome. I'm gonna show what your what is this, your link tree, so they can find all your links right here. All right, so you've got Substack, Patreon, merch, YouTube. I don't see your Rumble link up there, bro. Speaking of which, you are shadow banned on Rumble. So I went yesterday and I go to rumble.com, right? And I go to search 7Cs, right? Check this out. All right. Your channel is nowhere to be found.
Oh,
that's
wow.
your fucking channel name.
Yeah.
All right. Not only that, but no content with your name in it. Where's the AM Wake Up with you on it, for example?
Yeah.
What happened here? Like, something weird is going on. I think it may be the number 7 in your name is messing with the link, with the search capabilities potentially. Again, what I would recommend is to raise a ticket with Rumble support about this and be like, guys, there's something going on, because if you search for my name, it's literally not coming up at all, and I've got a channel, I've done appearances, and there's no reason that you shouldn't find me. So by all means, I believe it's rumble.com/user/7Cs live. Is that right? Yep.
Yeah.
All right. That's where they would find you on Rumble. But you do have a Rumble channel. You're on Twitter. You're on YouTube for as long as they allow you to be on there.
Yeah.
And then Substack, I think you said you're just starting to get into Substack now to publish.
Yeah,
over there?
I don't have an article yet, just because I've never written an article before in my life. I think like some of the posts that I've done on Twitter could be considered like articles, because I do like these long threads, and stuff like that. But I'm really I wanted to do it on Alex Jones, because he ended up trying to come for me like the week before. I had said something like COVID was staged, the election was staged, and he commented back and said everything's staged but you, of course. And that just kind of came out of nowhere because I've called him out and stuff for his like CIA family ties and omitting the whole Israel part of the conversation, championing Donald Trump and Elon Musk, which is a stark contrast to the Alex Jones I grew up with. So I was considering doing a breakdown of like every single time he's mentioned like one of his family in the CIA or all of his work with like Jerome Corsi and Roger Stone. His promotion of like the Z Lab products, which roll up to like Colson Capital. But now I'm thinking that I'll probably end up doing one that's like a mainstream alternative media, and kind of breaking down a few of the most prominent characters and their ties and stuff, and I'll just throw him in there as a centerpiece or something.
Well, let me be an advocate to say that Substack is a lot more than just writing. And I think a lot of people get into, I don't want to write, I want to write an article on Substack, and certainly that's one way to do it. I also use it as a podcast vehicle. Like I upload my video clips directly there and then push that out to my entire email subscriber database on a daily basis. All right. I also use it for my live stream alerts. So when I'm about to go live on Sundays, Sunday at noon, a live stream alert will go out with all the details and links to find the stream everywhere. Like there are appearances, like the one, when I was on AM Wake Up or with Jason and Knights of the Storm. I'm able to kind of communicate this and use this as a hub to share not just articles and stuff that I want to write about, which I certainly have done. All right. And I've put articles together. The majority of what I do are clips and video clips and using it as a podcast vehicle, but more importantly, building up a user database of opted in people without the filter of an algorithm that I can put this in their inbox every single time I have a thought that I think that it's important for them to see. And then I get statistics on exactly who's opening what they're clicking on and what they're engaging with, so I know what's resonating and what isn't. I think that's really important to do. You can see there this is indiemediatoday.com. That's my Substack. There's the one about Stripe and Ryan Christian right there. The one about RFK is right there also. So I also have the most popular ones and some categories. And then recommendations. I also wanted to mention very quickly, I know we're hitting the time, but recommendations on Substack's important because I've picked up a ton of new subscribers because of these little recommendations. When they put Indie Media Today in their recommended links. So I would encourage, to share. And again, there's over 100, I think 65 Substacks are currently recommending us. And we've picked up over 2,800, almost 2,900 subscribers just from people referring. And the power of the referral network is massive. So I encourage big time to leverage Substack, but not to use it as your primary, to use it as a way to drive traffic toward your other vehicles, specifically something self-hosted. All right. So yeah, man, this was awesome. I really appreciate you spending the time. I'd love to do this again sometime. Anytime you're open to do something, you just reach out. You know where to find me. Everybody, real quick, before we go, these are the amazing people that have supported INN, that fund the media that they want to see. That's our wall of fame. Everyone that has contributed to our network goes up there. I'd love to see your name up there too. If it's not already, please, you can do that by Cash App, ko-fi.com/Indie News Network, paypal.me/Indie News Network. I don't really want you to support at the platforms. If you have to, please do. But try doing it at one of these other places. It puts more money in our pockets and doesn't fund those platforms because they got plenty of money to fund themselves. And all we have is you. So, and of course, fund and support 7Cs, support independent media. And we'll be back real soon. This was INN One-on-One, and I had a blast today. So thanks, everyone. And support independent media. We'll see you soon. Later, everyone.
Thank you.
You can't keep giving us nothing and think we're bluffing about coming for your heads. Why play civil if you won't listen? Up 50,000 died, and now we know our mission. We form a militia, make Congress a prison. No, I play civil when all these dead won't make you listen. What's more American than slaying your oppressors? What's more American than liberty or death first? God, I thought we were founded on abolishing the tyranny of those who would starve a village all to live empirically. And I regret that I have only one life to give for my cause now that I can see the cause so clearly. See, I want our leaders, regardless of party, to fear me.
Who are these people?